All right, guys, today on BG Cast, I am so happy to announce our guest. He is the creator of spaceweathernews.com, author of Weatherman's Guide to the Sun, The Next End of the World. In my honest opinion, I would say he's one of the most credible researchers when it comes to climate science as well. A lover of freedom, a family man also. Let's welcome Mr. Ben Davidson.
Pleasure to be here, guys. Thanks for inviting me.
And it's a pleasure to have you on, Ben. It totally is. So I've been following you for about 5 years now. I was actually introduced to you by two people. One you might actually know. He's a fellow YouTuber, and one is actually a friend of mine back from the DC area. Higher Truth Rises actually pointed me to your channel about 5 years ago. He ended up disagreeing with you on things, and me, the kind of person that I am, I like to actually look at all avenues and look at many different points of view. And then when I found your channel, I resonated a lot more with your point of view, because you had a lot of substantial evidence to back up everything you were talking about. So my question, I guess I'm going to start off with here, Ben, is what got you into catastrophism, space weather, studying the sun? Was there a pivotal moment that actually led you to this, or was it something that just was a wild hair or a spur of the moment thing?
It started off when I was the lead researcher for a venture capital firm, and I kind of got tired of just making very, very wealthy people even more wealthy. And so I figured, hey, as a side hobby, I'm going to make a YouTube channel and do the same kind of level research I do for them, but about stuff that I find interesting and I think other people would find interesting. They had just come out with the new solar satellite, the Solar Dynamics Observatory, which is the beautiful thing we show in our daily program.
Mm-hmm.
And so I focused on the sun, earthquakes, and weather. And it became very, very apparent very quickly that meteorologists do not look at the sun, seismologists do not look at the sun. People who study the sun don't look at earthquakes. There's no crossover there, because if there was any crossover there, all of these connections would have just been known to the entire world for a long time. Specialization is wonderful, and subspecialization is wonderful because it really helps drive some important progress in certain areas, but it also means you have to have your head in a box. You don't get to poke up and look around and see what other people are doing. Half the time you don't know what research the guy in your department down the hall is doing. Mm-hmm. And so we've lost that interdisciplinary renaissance view of science in the world and things like that. And I sort of did that by accident, started looking into all of these things all together. At the same time, more information was coming out about Earth's magnetic field changes. And really everything just kind of clicked and came together in a way that was perfectly well suited for my training and too magnanimous to ignore, to be honest.
And I really, that's one thing I think, a lot of people find interesting is the fact that the sun directly correlates, and the activity on the sun directly correlates with activity down here on Earth. I've seen it in a lot of your videos, how you show there are magnetic points between the planets, and where magnetic fields do oscillate and do have a reverberation effect. So, and now the interesting thing I've noticed about your work and the whole timeline of the Micronova event is it lines up to a lot of ancient cycles that have actually occurred here on this planet. Did you notice that while you were doing your research?
Not until it became apparent that I needed to dive deep into everything. When I made the decision, okay, I am going to do more than just geophysics and astrophysics. I'm going to see what else can be used in this. And that's, of course, where the galactic physics came in, but also that's where religious texts, mythology, and other stories from the past came in. And it's amazing that whether you're looking at the physics of the galaxy, the physics of how stars work, whether you're looking at geologic history, whether you're looking at modern geophysical evidence, or whether you're looking at religion and mythology, every single one of them tells the exact same story. Most of the time in science, you are on one narrow path and you make an educated guess, the best you can. Here, we're basically left with only one option at the end of the day from like 8 different directions. And Again, that can't be ignored. But it really wasn't maybe until I would say 4 to 6 years ago that it really hit me how much religion and mythology could actually help, and how much they corroborated the actual physical scientific evidence that we have about what's going on.
Hey Ben, can I ask you a question? I like that. So on that note of religion and mythology, we have kind of a modern mythos that's created by Hollywood and sci-fi. And I'm just wondering, like, what's a movie you think about a lot when you're going through your work, or a book?
Wow, there's a lot of them.
How about just lately? Like,
Just lately, yeah.
yeah.
You just list a few that you've been into as of the past year or so.
The past year, in terms of books, I've mostly been reading textbooks,
Yeah.
but I got back into the movie Snowpiercer, which has a lot to do with our upcoming future, and it ties a little bit of geoengineering into there as well, which for anybody who knows about geoengineering, I probably don't have to tell you it is not a good idea.
Most certainly not. Most certainly not.
Are you guys familiar with Snowpiercer?
Actually, no, we have not.
That's not one.
Honestly, we have not
No.
seen it. I'm gonna actually, now that you've brought it up, I'm definitely gonna check it out.
Like, what's the basic plot?
The plot line is everyone's terrified of global warming, and so they start spraying the sky and they end up freezing the planet.
Oh,
Okay.
that actually, I'm really, we're gonna have to check that out when we get done here today.
That's a good movie. That's a good movie.
No,
Other than that, there's one called The Colony. And this one's tough to find because there's a couple different shows and movies called The Colony, but this is the one with Lawrence Fishburne, the guy who played Morpheus in The Matrix.
Okay.
okay.
That one, there was also geoengineering that froze the world, but that one really shows a little bit more of it's basically Mad Max in a frozen Earth.
Ooh.
And I really, really like that one. And if you're noticing a theme to what I'm talking about here, we are not on the verge of seeing unending global warming. We are overdue for the ice age, and the planet's going to get pretty cold in the not so distant future.
And that's one thing I actually, if you would love to take just a couple of seconds to explain, because I know there's going to be a few people who haven't actually seen your work or anything like that are going to watch this. Could you just explain in a little bit of detail how when the global ice caps melt, that it actually does produce a global cooling effect? I think that is something that not a lot of people understand.
So there's actually two things we have going, and I'll actually hit that one second. The first one, this is as easy to look up online as searching something like 100,000 year ice age cycle. Basically, we spend about 90,000 years in a glacial cycle, and then we spend about maybe 10, 12,000 years in an interglacial, which is where we are now, a nice warm Earth. They never last more than 10 to 12,000 years. And we are 12,000 years into this one. And so we are absolutely due for another glacial cycle, another ice planet scenario. Beyond that, there are these things that happen every approximately 6,000 years called Heinrich events, where the planet warms up a little too much, ice gets melted at the polar regions, and this does two things. It freshens and it cools the oceans, because that's just fresh water, fresh cold water being dumped into the oceans. And so that effect, a lot of people think of climate as being the atmosphere. The climate of the atmosphere is about 80% the oceans and their heat exchange and their heat capture and other things like that. You cool the oceans, you cool the entire planet. The other thing is, and this was the plot line of the movie, oh shoot, what was it called? Day After Tomorrow, where there was a critical desalinization point, and it shut down the Gulf Stream and the Atlantic Meridian, overturning circulation in the ocean, and it basically froze the world. Now, that was a little extreme, both in its severity and its rapid timeline, but nevertheless, when you cool the oceans, you begin to cool the atmosphere. When you freshen the oceans, you shut down the heat transport that takes a lot of the tropical heat up to higher latitudes and really allows the majority of, well, at least the northern hemisphere to live the way that they do. And then beyond that, you hit that critical point where just about the time that the atmosphere is starting to cool because you've cooled the oceans, you have cooler, fresher water near the polar regions. And, salt makes it harder to freeze. Warmth makes it harder to freeze. You've desalinated because of fresh water. You've cooled it because it's fresh ice melt. And you basically get a rapid refreeze of the polar regions after you've lost all that ice. That helps to reflect sunlight back into space. That's called albedo. And it sort of is a runaway process for a little while that really cools the planet back off. Earth has these tremendous safety mechanisms that really allow for the Earth to correct a temperature. So, for example, let's say that we actually were able to keep warming and warming and warming the planet. Eventually, it's going to cause so much evaporation. There's going to be so many clouds in the sky that it's going to block sunlight and evaporate and, bounce it back off into space with that albedo, and that will cool the planet off. If you get into a snow Earth scenario where basically the entire planet is frozen, you've frozen out all the water from the atmosphere. There's virtually no clouds. A lot more sunlight comes in and heats the planet back up. This planet cannot just go one way. It has unbelievably efficient safety mechanisms to bring it back into self-correct. And yes, there's been warming. Yes, there's been polar ice melt, and it will self-correct fairly well. In fact, we're already starting to see some of that. We're starting to see the circulations in the oceans beginning to shut down. We're seeing the salinization changes in the ocean. And in case anybody hasn't noticed, yes, there are still heat waves, but these cold and snow waves aren't stopping. And they seem to break records every time they come. And that's going to continue and get worse as we move forward as well.
I can see that. A good example. When I was watching your live Q&A the other day, you were talking about how you have a microclimate set up down there over at Observer Ranch. And, I've been in Colorado for 7 years. I know you got here about around the same time. I've noticed too that the weather has become profoundly more cold during the winters. We're getting way more of a polar vortex. We're getting way more wind chill. It was pretty interesting to see -15 up here in Lakewood, Colorado at this time of year. And I think that's really, honestly, I think this is something a lot of people need to know, is because if you look at the mainstream narrative, what they're trying to tell you is like, I've seen you talk about this in your videos before too. It was global warming, global warming, global warming. Then all of a sudden, when the statistics and the data started to show that things were getting cooler, it now changed to climate change. And that I found was very interesting in how it correlated up with your work. I guess one other thing I want to talk about now is I know you've probably spoken about this ad nauseum, but for some of the newer viewers who are just getting to know you, maybe we can get a little bit of a breakdown of the micronova timescale.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a couple of ways to approach that.
Okay.
So on the longer time scale, there's something that happens every 12,000 years in the solar system. And we've had evidence of this on Earth. It is what some people mistakenly think was a comet or a meteor about 12,000 years ago. The problem is there was a very similar event 12,000 years before that, 12,000 years before that, and 12,000 years before that. And it's not just that there are impactors. There's major volcanic eruptions all over the globe. There are magnetic excursions or straight up magnetic pole reversals during these events. And most importantly, there are isotopes that rain down on the planet that can only be produced in a nova event, a nova class event from a star. Some people hear the word nova and they think supernova, a star dies, that's the end. That's less than 0.1% of all nova events. Most nova events do not destroy the star. They leave it behind to do it again. And those are far, far, far more common. We know that there are stars that likely have millions of years recurrence timescales. We know of stars that go boom every couple of years on these timescales. The sun does it about every 12,000 years. And the main trigger for that is an introduction of a galactic magnetic event while there is an introduction of galactic dust at the same time. And it just so happens those recurring nova events can happen in two ways, either a strong magnetic kick or a magnetic punch, however you want to put it, or the accumulation of too much material on the star, and then it kind of sneezes, so to speak.
That's a good way to put it.
And so when you have the galactic current sheet, which should be hitting our solar system about every 10 to 12,000 years, you have both a magnetic kick and you have dust from the galaxy that is actually attracted to that current sheet, just like a static Swiffer duster in your home. And so the two ways you can actually get a star to nova are both coming at the exact same time. It has been seen, it has been measured in our galaxy. They're already noticing the extra dust in our solar system right now. And so from a galactic perspective, it is delivering the things that cause a nova. From the Earth perspective, the only way to explain all of these different things, especially the isotopes, is with a nova. And it just so happens that the process of material accumulating on the sun, it darkening a little bit, and then it blasting off in a great flash is the only way to satisfy a lot of religious and mythological stories as well. And so this is what I sort of meant before by, usually in science, you gather up as much evidence as you can, and you're on this narrow path and you try to make a guess. Here, take religion, take mythology, take geophysics, or take galactic astrophysics. They're all pointing in the same direction, and that is that there is a solar micronova that occurs about every 12,000 years. And unfortunately, the last one was about 12,000 years ago. And we see all the evidence that we're building towards that once again now.
And the evidence you brought forth, I do want to say I call it insurmountable, because not only have you found other sun-like stars that nova in recurring different periods, you've not only, like you said, found it in the geological record, you have also, from watching the CIA disaster unclassified video, the glass beads on the moon, the glass beads in the Sahara Desert, and even lining up with in a lot of mythological texts that state the moon, even verbatim from what you said in your video, the moon turned a blood red during this whole event. And that would really line up with a giant plasma sheet actually heading right towards our planet. And I honestly want to break your thoughts on this, because I know we kind of talked about this at the meet and greet a little bit. You explained proficiently in a way that the Pacific Ocean is not going to be a place you want to be during this event. Do you care to touch on that a little bit for us?
Well, none of the oceans are going to be terribly friendly places to be.
Yeah.
The coastline. So one of the things that is easy to see in the evidence, very, very hard to explain, is the fact that the part of the world that is facing the sun when it has its flash, and the part of the world that actually takes the impact of the micronova shell, is not random. Now, I want to preface this by saying ancient people thought the world was flat, thought the sun was literally a living God looking down on them, making decisions about their daily lives. They thought that if they did something wrong, they could piss off the moon and it would have terrible consequences. Yet they could predict eclipses. When it was nighttime, they knew the sun was coming, and when it was daytime, they knew it was going down and it would be night. Sometimes the evidence doesn't require an intimate mechanistic understanding in order for you to know what's going to happen next. It's nice to know why certain things are going to happen, but you don't always need to know the why to understand what is about to happen. And it just so happens that we know that these places that take the flash from the sun and these places on Earth that take the impact are going like this on a very predictable path every single 12,000 year cycle. North America and the Americas in general took the smack from the micronova shell 12,000 years ago. It's why these continents were basically wiped clean and had to be rediscovered over the last several thousand years, why humanity restarted on the other side of the planet. The middle of the Pacific is what should take the actual shockwave now. And the reason why this is so dangerous is because it will compress the magnetic fields to the point where there will be something like a thunderbolt from the gods, if you guys have ever heard of that term, a major arc discharge of plasma from the sky down into the ocean. And anybody could set up an experiment and do this themselves. We did it in Billy Elverton's plasma lab. Water will flow against a current. Like it'll be attracted to it and flow against it. And so when you have this arc discharge down from the sky, it's going to create this huge bulge up in the Pacific that then slams back down and sends an enormous wave out in all directions.
Wow.
That's something I would not want to be around. Most certainly not. Most certainly not. It's very interesting too, because we're both electricians, Joe and I, and we have the knowledge. We have knowledge in AC and DC theory, and I believe this wholeheartedly, because when you do compress a magnetic field, especially one that is electrically driven like the planet Earth's, you are going to get plasma arcing, most certainly. And I do think that is would be a very interesting sight to see. Unfortunately, I don't think I would want to be there to see it, but I definitely something to look out for, man. So I know you've brought this up a couple of times. This is just something I really want to pick your brain about real fast. How much do you think governments actually know about this event going down?
All of it. All of it. They know every last aspect. They know more about this than I do.
I was going to say, because I know you have observers in high places, you've stated before, and I know you don't want to, I don't want you to reveal them either. I'd like to keep them nice and safe also. Have they explained to you in any way that the higher ups do know what's going on and that they are getting ready for this?
Yeah, although I don't really need them to. They've told me some things, but one individual in the know is only given so much information. They are only responsible for either caretaking a tiny bit of information or doing research on one thing. When you start to look at what they're actually doing, and when you start to look at some of the things they have attempted to classify, it becomes readily apparent how much they know. To me, the greatest whistleblower on this is Major Maynard E. White, who unfortunately passed a few years ago. He's the one who led Project Nanook to the Arctic, when they actually discovered the alternating layers in the Arctic of polar fossils, tropical fossils, polar fossils, tropical fossils, polar fossils, separated by about 12,000 years, indicating that the world goes like this and then goes back, and goes like this and then goes back. And were it not for him keeping classified documents from the mission, from the Pentagon, from RAND, we wouldn't know, a fair bit about exactly what they know. He gave all these things to his son to publish right before he died, and that's in a book called World in Peril, and that is an absolutely phenomenal book. Rand did all the math and the magnetic calculations to actually show why the Earth goes like this and back and this and back, although finding those alternating fossil layers was enough to know what happened. But he literally gave us everything there. And so there's things like that really tell you, holy cow, they know all of this. I truly believe that this is why they went to the moon. If you look at those videos of the astronauts and their conversations, they're basically talking about what they were commanded to look for. Like, we got a nice big glass splatter there. Is that what we're looking for? Oh, we got a nice splatter here. We got more glass here, more glass. They're talking about glass the entire time.
Yeah.
And they've got all the zap pits in the glass as well from, the flash burns and creates the glass, and then the micronova shell pelts them, and you actually get those zap pits in the burned surface, which is turned into glass. Really, there's so much that they know that's really hard to actually get your head around unless you spend your entire life trying to do so.
And I can understand that.
Can I ask you another question? How much time, Ben, do you spend speculating about help that 12,000 years ago or currently we might be getting from interdimensional or off-world type of civilizations?
It's obvious that there's some interference But given what it would take for there to be any interaction at all, I have no choice but to conclude that they don't do everything they could possibly be doing.
Mm-hmm.
If they can get here, if they can shift through dimensions, or if they can travel that distance of space in such short amount of time, there's nothing I would put past them, including stopping the star from actually having its micronova. And this is where I really begin to favor the idea that Earth is something between a species nursery and a species testing ground.
Wow.
Where,
Yeah.
you know, we're put here in a relatively benign place. We are given challenges every once in a while to help us grow up, things like that. And I really favor that hypothesis above all others, that, yeah, I mean, I absolutely believe in other beings, but I really think that there are, you know, the plan is to not screw with us too much. There are probably times when they have to come down here, run tests, see how certain things are going, see how we react to certain things, which would be a lot of the interaction stories that people that, you know, you hear about. I had some very interesting things happen to me when I was a child that I really can't explain, and which I thought weren't real until I started hearing other people's stories. And I'm like, that happened to me.
Wow.
Well, you want to know what's funny, Ben? Now that you say that, I would like to share something with you, and it's something that occurred to me for about 7 years, and because Joe and I on our show, we've both had very interesting things happen to us before as well. So for about 7 years there, I was having what I would call a reoccurring tsunami dream. Now, at first, when they first started occurring, it was about like once, twice a month, but it happened in succession every single month, and it happened over the course of 7 years. At first, they were, I wouldn't say not real, they were real, but they were in places that I had never seen before with people I was never with. And you would hear this rumble. And, Ben, when I'm telling you, I'm looking at this tsunami, when we were looking at the CIA declassified video, the 2 mile high, they were claiming this is how big this thing was. Every time it would start to approach the shore. But in the dream, every time I managed to find some way to escape. I managed to get away from this tsunami. And then over the course of the years, the places started to become more realistic. So I told you before that I'm originally from the DC area. Yeah, I know it's a wonderful place there. And but
Congratulations on not being there anymore.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm trying to get out of Denver soon too. Trust me, that's on the next plan. And I was on the Potomac River working, and then I heard the rumble, and I saw a giant wave just swell up the Potomac coming up into Georgetown. And these started happening in places I know. And then I think the one that was the real kicker that I still can't actually explain to this day, just because of how very bizarre it was. So in this dream, at this point, I was in an ancient megalithic city that was on a coastline. And the pyramids we had were a little bit more advanced than what we kind of see today in Egypt. And we had like these different kinds of boat crafts. They could fly, but they could submerge and be boats at the same time. It was very hard to explain. And then what ended up happening was I was in the tide pools of the coastline with people who I called my family in the dream. I had never met them before, never knew anybody. It was really cool was the sharks and the dolphins were coming up and asking us to pet them. Like they were coming rubbing up on our legs and stuff. And I remember it was a very surreal dream. And I remember two of the people who were in my family ended up walking away. And then I was with this woman who I knew as my mother. And that's when I heard the rumble. And that's when I knew, because at that point I had been having this dream now for about 5 years, and I had learned how to become lucid during the rumble. And I heard the rumble. I grabbed this woman's hand, and we ran into one of the pyramids. And one of the pyramids had like an elevator thing. And I'm sitting here, I'm getting frustrated trying to get this elevator to work. It's not. The wave hits the pyramid, throws us out. I don't know how, in some way, shape, or form, we end up getting into one of these little boat crafts. And then when it hits, the second wave hits, it sends us into the mountain range that was nearby. And I remember we got out, and I'm looking around, and I'm just seeing this wave overtake everything. And I'm just hearing people screaming. And it was a very like supremely emotional thing. And, I'll digress it right there. But I guess you could say like people like us who are, who I would say have spiritual insight have kind of seen something like this coming for a while.
I would say so.
I would say,
I hear stories like that every week. Every single week, I've probably heard hundreds of people who have basically had some kind of foreshadowing of this event coming in a lot of ways. It's not always a tsunami. Sometimes it's something with the sun. Sometimes it's the aftermath, when things have calmed back down. But I hear stories like that all the time. As you might imagine, I get a lot of emails and a lot of comments.
oh, I'm sure. I even saw during the live Q&A, I had to throw that little comment on there about Pangea is Rubik's Cube solved. I was like, what is he trying to get at? I have no idea.
Well, I like the sound of it.
But it was interesting. No, I saw Ben was getting frustrated. He's like, what are you trying to say? Like, use the English language to break decipher it. I'm sitting there like, wow, this is a little bit funny. And I'm sure you get all kinds of very interesting emails and interesting comments like that also.
On that note, Ben, what is the thing that you most like to hear about when people take the information and the science that you're sharing with them and using it practically? How do you see people that are in your audience using your information practically?
I'll tell you what I like to see, and it's not a specific thing. The number one thing I like to see is when people aren't indecisive.
Okay.
When you give somebody some kind of a proposal and they're like, okay, let me think about it. And like that little part of you can tell, like, you're never going to hear from this person again.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's because they're too afraid of every aspect of it. And a part of their brain doesn't work or want to click. And they're not able to make decisions about things. I see people get stuck. I see people basically freeze up under the gravity of this entire aspect. And whether it's getting their family and moving somewhere, whether it's starting to prep, whether it's starting to do their own research into these things, I love it when I see people act quickly. Right. So many people are just so afraid to act quickly. It's put it this way, those people, I know exactly what's going to happen to them when this all goes down. They're going to be deer in the headlights and they've got no shot.
Right. And I can, and that's the one thing too. And I mean, I even heard you quoted as being pragmatic about it. And we both really like that term. I kind of derived this question from your Q&A. I do agree with you. I think at this point at right now, it is the time of action. We do have to prepare. We do need to make sure that there is a way to make it through this, because like you've stated in multiple videos of yours before that, we survived it last time. All right. And we're going to be able to survive it again. And I think being proactive about this is the number one way to go. But the question I want to get to about it, I actually saw in your live Q&A, and maybe we can dive into a little bit about this, is what can fellow observers do to establish communication, networking, and safe havens during this event? I know exactly. It's a tough one. I know. Maybe there is.
I don't know if there is something that can be done in terms of communication. Safe havens are a little bit easier of a question, but in terms of communication, like long range, I have absolutely no idea, because one, I wouldn't expect any device capable of it to survive the electric induction. If you could have a device that would survive it, none of the repeaters are going to be working. The ionosphere is not going to be the same as it once was. Good luck. Even if you're a ham radio expert, you ain't skipping like you used to. You're going to have to relearn how to skip off the ionosphere and talk to anybody all around the world. And you better hope that the other person on the other side of the world figured out how to skip the way you did. This is such a challenge. I have absolutely no idea how we actually communicate with other people after this goes down. No idea. Because all electronics should be completely destroyed.
And I agree too, especially, when we're going to have electrical induction like that occurring, yes, everything's going to get pretty destroyed. I do think I I guess one of my things I would say is maybe to establish at least people with your area who are observers, maybe try to get a network going there. I mean, one thing we've talked about in this scenario before, most of you, I mean, what you can do and what you can bring to the table as far as contribute, as far as trades, craftsmanship. Are you raising the beef? Are you growing the vegetables? Are you all these different things? I think in kind of in that way, that could help establish some kind of a network, at least in your local area. So you don't have to necessarily go through this alone. And now the one thing you brought up before is definitely during the first couple of weeks after this, you do not want to associate with other people. You want to at least stay your distance. You want to explain that a little bit to us?
Yeah. Unless you have an intentional community already set up together and you have an agreement about how you're going to work together and operate after this goes down, you can't trust anybody. Everybody's going to be more desperate than the most desperate crackhead you've ever heard of.
Wow.
Yeah.
It'd be dark times.
To be honest, if you've managed to survive and like 5 days later, you see somebody else, you better either hide and pray they don't notice that what you got going on, or just suck it up and click.
That sounds like Cormac McCarthy's The Road. Have you ever read that one?
Yeah.
It's a pretty dark post-apocalyptic kind of story, but he can't trust anyone, like you said. I hope it doesn't come down to that,
Well, the one thing too, actually, now that we're talking about human behavior, the one thing I really loved was your video that you did on the effects of the weakening magnetic field in human behavior. And I know you've broken down into it a little bit. If you don't mind, let's talk about it again just for a little. What does a weakening magnetic field and more solar radiation and things like that do to the human body and the human mind?
Well, the human body physiologically is an electromagnetic machine. Obviously, our brain and our nervous system, but the cardiac system is more electrical energy than the nervous system. Every movement of our muscles, almost everything is based on ion exchanges: potassium, magnesium, calcium, sodium. And so there's a lot of physical processes that can go awry, a lot of them having to do with the heart. Psychologically, this becomes far more interesting because the weakening magnetic field allows more radiation to reach our brain, cosmic radiation. And the two parts of our brain that are most affected are the hippocampus and the locus coeruleus. When the hippocampus is affected, cognition goes down. When the locus coeruleus is impacted by too much radiation, fear, panic, anxiety, terror responses all go up. Wow. And so we have a loss of cognitive function combined with an increased likelihood to go into a fear, terror, anxiety, panic response. These things lead to emotional instability. And boy, if that's not just what we're seeing in the world the last couple of years, if not last couple of decades, people just seem to not be so smart anymore. Right. On the whole, they seem to be more emotionally fragile. They seem to be more reactive in the weirdest and most unproductive ways. And they seem to be making absolutely terrible decisions.
Yeah.
Well, no, I agree. No, you look at that too. And as even what Joe just said too, I think in the same simultaneous sense also that there's more people starting to wake up to what's going on as well. And do you think that could also do you think that the weakening magnetic field could also have an effect on people waking up and things like that?
Very possible.
Okay.
There is this duality to almost everything. It's amazing how much more people are able to see, the more lunacy is revealed in the world. And, maybe they don't know the why or the how, but whether it's from the magnetic changes or just because they've got their eyes open and they can see that the world is going basically in a downward spiral like this, and they're talking to people they've known for years, friends, family, and they're like realizing something's not right, something is changing here. For a huge portion of the population, that's something they can't ignore. Not everybody is detrimentally affected by normalcy bias and cognitive dissonance. A lot of people can take in new information and make new determinations and judgments, change their mind about certain things. And I think that in a lot of ways, that's the separation of the wheat and the chaff right there.
Right.
Exactly.
Ongoing.
It goes back to what you were saying before about this might be either a nursery or a testing ground. Like, it really, to us, it seems like a testing ground.
So since we're talking about this again, let me pick your brain on this also. So we've used the reference from Star Trek Next Generation, the first episode, where they're trying to go intermingle, they're trying to branch out to other species and things like that, and they're like, well,
explore the galaxy.
We gotta put you through this test first, this simulation first, to see if you're gonna act out your egoic self and all of your human cruelty and things like that. That's something we've talked about ad nauseum in our podcast, is we do believe that right now we are being tested. There is something going on. I do think also, I mean, I know you're an Andrew Tate fan as well as I am also. I do think that there is a lot of key things to be looking at the world stage when it comes to the testing ground. But another thing I want to kind of branch off to on this, one of my favorite things you talk about is the global electric circuit. Being an electrician, I really dig that topic, and I actually wanted to ask you now: do you think it would be possible, in your own opinion, with the knowledge that you have, to utilize this global electric circuit for some kind of purpose of energy? And do you think it's maybe possible that the ancient humans, before the Younger Dryas incident occurred, possibly had access to this?
I'm sure it's possible. I think we're a long way away from figuring out how we do that. I am almost certain that previous civilizations knew how to do that kind of stuff. All you have to do is take a look at the stone, the megaliths that survived, and you realize these people were more advanced than we are right now.
Right.
And then you realize, holy cow, none of their metal, none of their technology, none of that survived. What happened to them? They went back to zero, and they were further down the road than we are.
Or we could be them. We could be their offspring. Who knows?
Well, exactly. But the point is, we went back to zero.
Right.
And so I do think that they were more advanced. If we were where we are now, maybe 1,000 years ago, I would say, yeah, we have the time to potentially figure some stuff out. I do think it's possible, but I think we're talking like decades to centuries of testing and study, all the while getting screwed with by the governments and the alphabet agencies and other things like that. They don't really like people messing around with that stuff.
No, they don't.
No, they don't. Well, I remember there was the guy they did the documentary on in the 80s. He actually started a perpetual motion generator, and they sent a news team out to debunk him. They wanted to prove him wrong, that it was not truly perpetual motion, and they could not debunk him. And then he started getting visited by the alphabet agencies and things like that.
Oh,
and definitely trying to shut people up when it comes to that. The one thing I do want to touch base with you, because I know you've written letters to NASA scientists, you've kind of gone to battle with them a little bit, trying to show them where they're going wrong in their research and their studies. And I got to commend you for that, man. That is a very awesome feat to do that, to actually go to battle with somebody, what people refer to as a reputable authority on information, and actually win. So I guess my question here is, what I'm getting at is do you feel that there is a narrative when it comes to a lot of climate science that is talked about in the mainstream?
Obviously, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I know that. I know. And that's kind of, where I'm touching at too. I think a lot of people could really benefit from listening to you, could really benefit from hearing the information that you deliver. I think you offer a more profound perspective when it comes to the cyclical nature of things here on the planet Earth. Even touching base a little bit on what you said, some people are scared stiff of this whole situation and it has them frozen in place. I've come to kind of see it as, this is how the earth has been and always will be. There's periods of time where the earth is at peace, and there's periods of time where the earth is in chaos, and it goes through this change.
Oh, I was just thinking, Ben, in your interactions online, I'm sure it's a daily occurrence. What do you do with these globe as we're told skeptics, sometimes referred to as flat earthers? And I'm wondering if you ever get pestered by them, and how do you interact with them? Is there anything you can help them with when you interact with them?
Most of them don't want to be helped. I mostly just squash and then clean them off the bottom of my shoe. None of them have any idea about geodesy and how we can actually determine that the earth is not flat. Most of them have no idea how the ancients figured it out. By the way, they built monuments with like the heliocentric planets in the solar system. Right. And they figured it out by watching the planets, watching the stars, watching the sun, watching the moon. That's something you don't need to know any math to figure out. And then you look at almost everything they try to use as evidence, and it's so easy to pick apart. Like there's these people who are like, you see this picture was taken from 200 miles away from Chicago, and yet you can see Chicago. But the problem is whoever took the photo and made the claim forgot to not include street names on the street signs right there. And so you can actually go to Google and see that it's like 6.5 miles away from downtown, not 200. You get people who are talking about, I use my binoculars and I was testing, and there's not they say for so far you go this way, the land should go like this. And I did a test and it's not like that. And I asked them, did you do it on the middle of the ocean?
Right, exactly.
Because if not, no, because the land is not completely flat. From the Appalachians to the Rockies, technically looks like a bowl. It goes the opposite direction of what the overall Earth does. And so unless you're doing that measurement in the ocean, a calm ocean, you're not doing anything at all. And so almost every single thing that they discuss is easy to debunk. They don't know about geodesy and the math that you can do here on the ground. They don't know anything about watching the skies and how the ancients, the people who, literally thought that the moon and the sun could be angered by our activity and they would take it out on them. They figured out that the planet wasn't flat and that we went around the sun. And so
I hear you, definitely. And it's unfortunately, it's not just a bunch of morons who think this. It's increasingly more intelligent. And one thing I'd like to say on that topic, since you can take apart, and that's what I was hoping that you would share some of the debunking and the actual science that goes along with this. But if you have guys like Elon Musk out there saying, hey, this is most likely a simulation. Now, this is what I share with my friends. I say on the topic of flat Earth, if it's a simulation, it's simulating that we're looking like we're on a globe. Would you agree with that?
If it is a simulation, yeah, sure. I'm not sure that it is.
What do you think?
Elon Musk is brilliant at a lot of things. He also gets he gets some stuff wrong. Luckily, it's not stuff that's directly related to his businesses. But he gets a lot of stuff wrong. There was a long time, and I don't know if this is still the case, but for over 10 years, every single thing he said about Mars was wrong in terms of how we were going to get there and what we were going to do, because he wasn't factoring in solar proton events or cosmic rays or other things like that. And I knew some people who worked for SpaceX who would straight up be like, yeah, I don't think Elon believes in cosmic rays. And it's like, okay. I see him make mistakes politically, culturally, economically. He's a great dude. I'm a fan of Elon Musk a lot more now than I used to be, especially since he made Twitter such a much better place.
Oh yeah.
And it really is a much better place now. Holy cow. But he's also not, he's not clairvoyant or angelic.
No,
of course. And Twitter is a better place than it once was. It's still a little bit of a shitstorm in my opinion, but It's a much better place than it once was. So I guess really now where I want to touch base with you on a couple of other things too. Let's talk about Observer Ranch. What are your plans for Observer Ranch in the new location? And are you looking forward to having that up and running here soon? And what events will you be holding at Observer Ranch for people to come check out?
Well, while the world is still turning, it will be the Observer Ranch Campground and Learning Center. Gonna have cabins, RV spots. We have a fleet of our own RVs. If you want to come, if you don't have one, but you want to come see what RV life is like, there's going to be weekly events with observers, official events, but every single day is basically going to be an observer party. Hopefully not a drunken one, but I also can't exactly stop people from bringing beer and drinking on their campsite. But essentially, the being surrounded by other observers, like-minded people, where these things that we're interested in, which we can't exactly go talk to random people about at the grocery store, we can't even talk to most of our friends, families about it. To be in a place where there's nothing but like-minded people in that sense is really a wonderful thing. And that's going to be something that's going to be happening every day. Like we said, there's going to be classes and other events, some taught by me, some by other experts and things like that. And then, of course, our major conferences, which we used to do all around the country and which we can't really trust in that anymore, since we don't know what area run by some idiot's going to get locked down because of some thing that Fauci invented.
That's right.
We decided we can't exactly be throwing tens of thousands of dollars at planning an event and buying a whole bunch of stuff if it's just going to get canceled like it happened with the 2021.
Hopefully we're past that.
Hopefully so, yeah.
We are not done getting screwed with by the powers that be, guys. They have a lot worse up their sleeve.
I would agree on that too. I think, I guess the one thing that Joe and I talk on our podcast a lot about is how we're kind of undergoing like a siege, not an ambush right now. And I do feel that in a lot of ways that people on our side of the argument are starting to gain more momentum and more people are starting to realize, but I do agree there's going to be a lot of last ditch efforts, 100%. And I do think that, they might try to implement the digital currencies. They might try to implement digital IDs. They're going to have all kinds of last ditch efforts. The one thing I did do, speaking of being drunken, you talked about you guys are sobered up now. I saw on the live stream you and Kat are both sober. As someone else who is also sober, if you don't mind me asking, what made you kind of go for that route in life?
Not only did we all always know it was a good idea, but we see how things are progressing. And as we both are trying to also have our spiritual healing as well, believe it or not, deep-rooted insecurities driven by childhood traumas are going to be detrimental in a majorly traumatic scenario, like what's going to happen to the earth. And so we're trying to work on that as well. And we both kind of realized that we need to be as healthy as possible. And so there's the putting the right stuff in your body, and then there's doing the right activities on a daily basis to make sure that you get yourself right and ready to go.
Right on.
Right on. And I agree with that wholeheartedly that, physical health will tie into a better outcome from this event. I even remember from the live Q&A, something about medium chain triglyceride oil helping with the hippocampus. That was a very interesting tidbit, and I'm actually going to do some research on that and maybe see what that comes up with. So, in all honesty, Ben, as we're wrapping up here, what would your predictions, I guess you could say, be when it comes to the next 10, 20 years, as far as maybe getting that X1000 flare that you've spoken about, maybe governments possibly trying to further prepare and hide what's going on? What based on your knowledge and your experience on the topic, what are some really forthright predictions you could make for what's going to occur?
How about a best case scenario?
Best case scenario. That works too. We could do a best case scenario.
A lot of times I think best case scenario is the sun takes out power to the planet next week and doesn't give the government chance to do anything else.
I like that as well. That's a good one.
They've got more pandemic related stuff. They've got digital currency, digital ID. They've also got things like climate lockdowns planned, restrictions on our freedom, other things like that. It's all about them being able to have control over us and then being able to resource grab before it's too late. And while that's going on, food will continue to be more expensive. Interactions with other humans will continue to be strained. Even with people waking up, they're too good at dividing us and getting us angry at each other and doing it at a rate that's much faster than people are waking up. If they are not successfully controlling us and resource grabbing enough, they'll just start World War III. They'll make the price of food go up tenfold, or they'll have hyperinflation come like that. We're basically going to be in a world of suffering, simultaneously on the verge of tearing itself apart. And then one day we're going to wake up and the sun's going to kind of look red. And that's going to really screw with people. And then it's going to look a little bit redder the next day. By the time it looks black a few days later, everyone's going to be panicking. There will be no more order. There will be nothing but chaos. And then the sun will bust off that shell in the micronova, unlock the crust from the mantle, set the world on a little bit of a turn like this, and basically set off almost every volcano that's not geologically dead.
Wow.
All the while pounding this planet with radiation as the oceans surge over continents, as the great earthquake rumbles everywhere all at once, as the crust is rumbling on top of the mantle. And so I have very few positive predictions. This is welcome to the cosmic Super Bowl. This is going to be brutal.
What if you were like watching all that from space? Would that give you a little different perspective?
I mean, yeah. What if I had a magic bubble where I could just sit here and watch all the terrible things, but none of it could touch me? Like, yeah. In theory, that
I remember you talking about even on the live Q&A that, I kind of referring it to as the new age crowd a little bit. They think we're going to gain all these superpowers and that, the beneficial extraterrestrials are just going to swoop on down and make everything okay. And I think
best of luck with that, New Agers. Best of luck. Ascension is nowhere near the nice fluffy story that they get told on the internet. I feel so terrible for the people who buy into it wholeheartedly. Yes, there's going to be some DNA changes, but nobody's turning into Superman.
It's definitely, that's something I've, one thing I've at least learned. At the premise of it all, God is love, love and light and things like that, but it's not all rainbows and unicorns when it comes to this situation or what exactly is going on right now.
Right.
And right. I think, that's one thing too, what I would even maybe call that cognitive dissonance to a degree, thinking that, I call it even kind of like a savior complex. And I think really in this scenario, the best thing we need to do is stand up and save ourselves. And that's honestly the most logical and reasonable thing. Even in the Bible, it states God only helps those who helps themselves. So with that note, Mr. Davidson, we're going to close off for today. And I really want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you got a family and you got the Cheyenne event tomorrow. I'm going to try to make it too. I got to check my schedule. And I really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us what you do. Sharing your knowledge. You're a phenomenally smart guy. But the one thing I really like is that you do in your videos explain and you help people understand. I think that is a really good thing for even some new observers who might just be checking you out. And yes, I know people need to watch the damn playlists. They do. And I definitely sat and watched your entire playlist for the past couple weeks on everything just to get geared up for this. So I want to wish you luck and thank you again for coming on, Ben. And I hope you have a really awesome day.
You too, brother. Much appreciated.
Of course, man. Thanks, man.
See you later.
All
See
right.
ya.